Hi there, One Event. Hope you're having a great weekend wherever you're watching and engaging from. It's not the same as being on the Lincolnshire Showground, but it's great that we get to be together virtually. My name is Joy Blundell and I'm on the ground level team, and I'm joined today by Ruth Valerio, who I'll introduce you to in a minute. We're excited as part of the ground level vision that we see a movement of churches advancing the kingdom everywhere. And when we talk about everywhere, we mean everywhere in all spheres of society, individuals speaking and telling a better story through their actions and relationships to see God's kingdom come to earth. And so today we're going to be speaking specifically about issues around the environment and creation stewardship. And so I'm joined by Ruth Valerio, who is the Director for Global Advocacy and Influencing, I think, at Tearfund. Do you want to tell us a bit, Ruth? I know you're an author and you're involved in all sorts of different things, but tell us kind of how you've arrived at what you're doing in Tearfund. What kind of are you passionate about?
Brilliant. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Joy. It's really good to be speaking with you today. And hello to whoever is watching this. It's great that you could join us, and sorry that we're not together in person. So what's brought me to where I am is a long story, which I won't go into here, but it started right back at university when I had my eyes opened both to issues of justice, that the God we worship is a God of justice who cares for the poor and for the dispossessed and wants to see that changed, and also a God who created the whole world and who cares for everything that he has created. Humans, yes, but not only humans. And realizing that actually you can't care for people without being interested in the air they breathe and the land they live on and the seas that they fish in. And you can't care about the whole wider creation without thinking about the humans that live in it and impact it. So that kind of hit me right back when I was at university. And then over the last however many years, I've been trying to live that out and outwork that in my own life, and really passionate about helping other people to live that out as well. So that's taken me through a whole range of different places and has led to me now taking on this role at Tearfund.
Great, tell us about that. What do you do for Tearfund, and just more broadly, tell us about Tearfund.
Yeah, so Tearfund is a brilliant organisation that I'm sure many of you watching are familiar with. It's an aid and development and advocacy organisation, works in around 50 countries around the world, and really is there to help see people lift themselves out of poverty and live transformed lives, recognising that all people are made in the image of God, and therefore poverty is an abomination to God. And as Christians, we can't stand by while that happens. The way that we work is very clearly through our local partners, in particular through local churches and church denominations and networks. So we, unless it's a situation of particular disaster, we will never go in and just build a school or do this or do that. We always go in, excuse me, work and empower and equip and help the churches that are there. So a lot of the work that we do alongside the really practical poverty relief work, we also do training and biblical work and helping to see churches envision so that they can be responding to the needs that are around them in their communities. So we're in some of the hardest places: Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, the Congo, South Sudan. We're in some of those hardest places, working right on the ground, helping to see people lift themselves out of poverty. And the work that I do is focused around advocacy, so advocating to governments and global institutions on the big systemic issues of poverty, and then also that theological work, the biblical envisioning comes from my teams as well.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear from you. I know you talked a lot about helping empower the church to release themselves from poverty, or the communities from poverty, and then you've talked about environmental stewardship. Can you tell us about how they fit together? Like, what is this climate crisis that we hear all about, and where do we find ourselves in the story of that?
So years ago, when I first started out on these sorts of issues, there were real debates that went on between the more development focused organizations and the more environmental focused organizations, and they were all fighting against each other. You know, is it more important to look after people, or is it more important to look after species and land and so on? And of course, in general, we know that those things are so interlinked. As I said, you can't care for people without caring about the land that they live on or the seas that they fish in, and vice versa. So those things are so linked, and nowhere do we see that more linked than in our climate crisis. So on one hand, our climate crisis is an environmental crisis, but at the same time, it's a human poverty crisis, and it just brings those two things together. So we know the current trajectory that we're heading towards is looking like at least a 3-degree warmer world, and that is a disaster. It's a disaster for the natural world, it's a disaster for coral reefs, it's a disaster for species as their means of food changes and changing patterns, and ecosystems around them die. It's also a disaster for people, because crops will die, sea level rise will wipe out huge amounts of land where people live. It's a disaster in terms of the heat. I know this will be going out a bit later, but we're just finishing that huge heat wave that happened at the beginning of August. And yesterday was horrendous. It was 30 degrees in my kitchen. And that, if it's going to be a few degrees warmer than that, you know, these things are terrible. People die from heat like that. So the climate crisis is an environmental catastrophe, and it's a human catastrophe, and those things come together. And what we have to remember is that this isn't something in the future. We're not, in one part, we are predicting, as this continues to happen, this is going to happen. But we are seeing that now. So I've been talking about these things for 20 years or so, and for most of that time I've been using the language of prediction. If we don't change our behaviour, if we don't sort this out, this is what we're going to see happen. We're going to see sea level rise, we're going to see increasing extreme weather events, we're going to see crop failure, we're going to see environmental refugees on an unprecedented scale. A few years ago, I realised I had to change my language. This is no longer prediction, this is happening. Now, all of the things that I said were going to happen, we're seeing. They're on the front pages of our newspapers and coming into our feeds. So we are seeing it now, but we don't throw up our hands and say, oh, well, therefore it's too late, because every degree, every percentage of a degree of warming will make a difference. So even now, where we are already seeing so much, the more we can do to change and to keep our emission, or to reduce our emissions significantly in order to keep temperature rise from going too high, every bit of action will make a difference.
Wow. And I know we'll get into maybe some practical things that people can do as they finish listening to this and are inspired. But before we do that, I'd love to talk about the campaign that Tearfund have just done, The World Rebooted. I've loved engaging with that, and we as a network as well have been asking really similar questions around what's our vision as we come kind of through, I mean, I think we've got a long way to go, but through the COVID-19 season. And we've got an opportunity to think about like a reset and also a rebuild or a reboot. What do we, the people of the different story, like with vision of praying heaven to earth, what could our world look like as we come through this? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts for what do you think the church has the opportunities to do in terms of imagining and praying and acting a new future? What could that look like?
Lockdown was fascinating, wasn't it? It was such a challenge. So many terrible things, and I know some areas of the country lockdown is still happening, so I know we're not fully out of that, of course. And there were so many terrible things that happened. And at the same time, we discovered some wonderful things too. Many of us discovered the joy of not having our daily commute and the extra time that brought. We discovered that actually when the shops were closed and we couldn't go shopping, we spent more time with our families, and family bike rides and walks and things like that all increased. As we did our daily walk and got ourselves outside, we rediscovered that there's this connection with the natural world, that when we don't have it, it impacts us, and connecting with the natural world for many of us became such an important part of lockdown and for our well-being, whether it was a city park or somewhere more amazing out in the countryside. And we discovered community again, rallying around and helping each other, setting up WhatsApp groups. I shopped for my neighbours, and I'm sure we all did different things. And we discovered that when there is a crisis, we can act. We can do that. And we are an incredibly creative, ingenious bunch of people. It also exposed some deep inequalities in our society. And for many, many people, whilst we need a functioning economy, many people don't want to go back to normal. There a whole number of surveys came out saying that only 9% or 12% or 6% of people want to go back to the old normal. So the question is, how can we stimulate our economy? We do need a good economy. How can we have an economy that works well, but that allows us to keep the good things that we discovered during lockdown, allows nature to breathe, gives us that space, and also begins to address some of those inequalities, some of those social and socio-economic inequalities that were exposed as well in the UK. And of course, many of those were along race lines in the UK, but also globally. And as Tear Fund, we've been working with countries and partners who have been so severely impacted by the pandemic. So there's this big challenge. How can we reboot our economy in a way that is socially just and environmentally sustainable? And at Tear Fund, we've been doing some really good work around that. I haven't got the time to go into all of the in-depth stuff within that, and would love people, if you just put in your search engine, Tear Fund World Rebooted, you'll come up with it and see some of that. But I think for us, there are different ways that we can, different emphases for us. So one is the personal. If we loved not having the cars on the road, and we loved the lack of pollution, and we loved the noise level being down and being able to hear the birds again and so on, well, we're the ones who drive, and no one's forcing us to get into our cars. So are we going to get back into our cars or not? We loved having clear skies with no airplane trails across them, and again, the lack of pollution that came from that. No one's forcing us to fly. Are we going to choose not to fly on holiday anymore? Or will we change our patterns of behaviour? But at the same time, I know that's simplistic, because quite a lot of that actually is determined by what the government does. So we need to be calling on the government to be putting in place this economic package that works along those lines. And there's specific action you can take on the Tear Fund website to call on the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to make that decision. So there are things that we can do as individuals, but then also calling on the government to act as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, I was going to ask about any practical things, not just for coming out of lockdown, but just engaging a bit more in being the body of Christ who stewards creation and his world better. Other things or resources you can point us in the direction of? So obviously the World Rebooted campaign. Anything else?
Yeah, I would, from a church level, I'd really recommend you have a look at the Eco Church scheme that's run by Arosha UK. If you just look for Eco Church, you'll find it. And that really gives you everything that you need as a church to get going on this journey. So that's the kind of one-stop shop. If you do nothing else, go to Eco Church and have a look at that. There are all sorts of resources on my own website as well. I've written a whole number of books and some specifically on this one around COVID-19 and how we can respond along justice and environmental lines. So if you go onto my website, you'll see various publications there. And then for us as individuals, it is about us making those choices and thinking through why do I do what I do and could I do it differently? So one of the biggest things that we can think about is our diet and moving away from a high meat and dairy diet. I'm not saying we all have to go vegetarian or vegan, but I do think we need to switch our diet round so that it's predominantly vegetable and grain based. And if we want to eat some meat, maybe just eat it once a week or something. Same for flying. You really think through, do I need to fly on holiday? Could, as a family or with friends, could we say maybe we'll just fly every other year or every 3 years, every 5 years or something, and switch your energy to a green energy supplier, something like Ecotricity or Good Energy or Octopus. That's a really simple thing to do as well. And then the final thing I would say is say no to single-use plastic. So buy yourself a reusable water bottle, ditch the shampoo and conditioner and the liquid shower gels. Have a look at how you can do that in ways that don't use so much plastic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruth. It's been brilliant to talk to you, and I know just recommend your website with all of those resources on. And for anyone watching as well, engaging with Ground Level on our website, we recently interviewed Hannah Bowring from Tear Fund, who was talking to us about the World Rebooted, and you can find that on the Exchange podcast. We've also got a really great podcast episode with one of our very own church leaders, but also environmental scientist John Henry Looney, who talked about our role in the re-envisioning a world that is cared for and looks more like heaven coming to earth. So I'd really recommend you just checking out the Exchange podcast on the Ground Level website for that. Have a brilliant rest of the weekend. Thanks, Ruth, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Cool. Bye.